Everything you know about replacing Windows is wrong. People think making a new computer system is just about writing better code, faster menus, cooler icons, maybe better security. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is much stranger. Windows became so big, so connected, and so deeply buried inside the modern world that removing it is a little like trying to replace the roads under an entire city while millions of cars are still driving on them. And the craziest part? Most people don't even realize how much of their life secretly depends on Windows until something breaks. Think about this. A hospital machine from 2009 still runs Windows. An ATM at your bank probably runs Windows. Factories, airports, train stations, cash registers, office computers, school computers, even giant machines that make other machines often run some version of Windows. In 2024, Windows still powered over 70% of desktop computers around the world. That is billions of people and businesses depending on one system every single day. So why hasn't anyone replaced it? Because the story of Windows is not really about software, it's about gravity. Back in the 1980s, personal computers were still new. Most people didn't even own one. Computers looked confusing and scary. Then, Microsoft made a deal that changed everything. IBM, the biggest computer company in the world at the time, needed an operating system for its new PC. Microsoft provided one. That operating system became MS-DOS. And this is where things get interesting. Microsoft didn't keep the system locked to one machine. Other companies could copy the IBM PC design and also use Microsoft software. Soon companies everywhere started building IBM-compatible computers. Compaq, Dell, Gateway. Suddenly millions of machines were all running Microsoft software. Then Windows arrived. Windows 95 especially changed the game. The Start menu, the taskbar, clickable icons. For many people, it was their first real computer experience. It felt magical at the time. Stores opened at midnight just to sell copies of it. People literally lined up to buy software. But here's the hidden part almost nobody talks about. Every new Windows version had to keep old stuff working. Always. If a business bought software in 1998, they expected it to still work years later. If a factory built expensive machines using Windows XP, they didn't want to replace everything just because Microsoft released a shiny new version. So, Microsoft made a very unusual choice. Instead of throwing old things away, Windows kept carrying them forward, like a giant backpack, year after year, decade after decade. That backpack became enormous. Modern versions of Windows still contain pieces of code and compatibility systems connected to software from decades ago. Some developers joke that Windows is basically a museum where every exhibit still has to work perfectly. And honestly, they're not completely wrong. Now imagine trying to replace something like that. Let's say a company creates a brand new operating system tomorrow. It looks beautiful. It's faster than Windows, more secure, less bloated. Sounds amazing, right? But then a company asks one simple question. Will our old accounting software still work? If the answer is no, the deal is dead instantly. Because businesses hate risk. A gaming company might survive a small problem. A hospital cannot. A bank cannot. An airport definitely cannot. One tiny software failure can cost millions of dollars. This is why compatibility became Windows' superpower. And also, its prison. Apple doesn't have this problem in the same way, because Apple controls both the hardware and software. They make the Mac and macOS together. If Apple changes something, they can control the whole experience. Microsoft can't. Windows has to run on thousands of different machines from thousands of companies. Tiny laptops, giant gaming PCs, cheap office computers, weird custom-built factory systems, old printers, ancient scanners. random USB devices nobody has heard of since 2006. And somehow, Windows has to make all of it work. That alone is unbelievably difficult. In fact, driver compatibility is one of the biggest hidden reasons Windows dominates. A driver is basically a translator between hardware and software. Your graphics card, keyboard, webcam, printer, and microphone all need drivers. And Windows supports an insane number of them. Linux, for example, is powerful and loved by developers, servers, and tech experts. Android itself is built on Linux. Most of the internet actually runs on Linux servers. But on normal desktop computers, Linux still struggles with one giant problem: compatibility. A random printer might not work perfectly. A game may crash. Special work software might not exist. Hardware companies often prioritize Windows first because that's where most customers are. And that creates a loop. People use Windows because software supports Windows. Software supports Windows because people use Windows. That loop is unbelievably hard to break. But the strangest example happened with Internet Explorer. Years ago, developers hated Internet Explorer. It was slow, old, full of problems. People made jokes about it constantly. Microsoft itself eventually replaced it with Edge. So why didn't businesses just stop using it? Because thousands of companies secretly built internal systems around Internet Explorer. Some office tools only worked in that browser. Some government websites depended on it. Some banks relied on ancient features nobody else supported anymore. Microsoft couldn't kill it easily because too many businesses depended on it. Think about how crazy that is. An entire modern tech company was partially trapped by software people built decades earlier. And this happens all across Windows. If you're enjoying this deep dive, consider subscribing because we explore the hidden stories behind technology every week. And honestly, some of these stories sound more unbelievable than science fiction. Now here's where the story gets even bigger. Most people think Microsoft sells Windows. But that's only part of the business. The real power comes from the ecosystem around Windows. Microsoft Office, Teams, Active Directory, Azure Cloud Services, Enterprise Tools, Developer Systems, Corporate Security Tools. They all connect together. Imagine a giant spiderweb spread across the business world. Now try replacing just one thread. You can't. Pull one part too hard, and the whole thing shakes. That's why many companies stay with Windows even when employees complain about updates or bugs. Switching sounds simple until someone actually calculates the cost. A company with 20,000 employees may need to retrain workers, replace software, rewrite internal tools, test security systems, and migrate years of files. That can cost tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. Suddenly, Windows doesn't seem so expensive anymore. But there's another reason replacing Windows became difficult. Humans. People don't like changing habits. You know how older relatives sometimes refuse to switch phones because they finally learned where all the buttons are? Now imagine that feeling inside a giant company. Millions of office workers learned Windows over decades. They know where files go. They know keyboard shortcuts. They know how to install programs. Even when people complain about Windows, they still understand it. And familiarity is powerful, very powerful. In psychology, this is called switching cost. Even small changes create stress. Studies have shown workers can lose productivity for weeks after changing software systems. That matters more than people think. Now you might ask, okay, but what about Google? What about Chrome OS? Good question. Google actually tried something interesting. Chromebooks became very popular in schools because they were cheap, simple, and cloud-based. For basic tasks like web browsing and documents, they worked great. But businesses still needed powerful desktop software. video editing, engineering tools, scientific applications, enterprise systems, specialized programs built only for Windows. And this is where many challengers fail. They solve 80% of the problem. But the last 20% is brutal, because that last 20% contains the weird, messy, deeply important software giant organizations rely on every day. There's also gaming. Gaming helped keep Windows alive in a huge way. For years, most PC games were designed mainly for Windows, because Microsoft's DirectX graphics technology became the standard. If you wanted the best PC gaming experience, Windows was usually the safest choice, and gamers are incredibly loyal. Steam statistics still show Windows dominating PC gaming. Even though Linux gaming improved massively with Valve's Proton system and the Steam Deck, Windows remains the main platform for most players. Now here comes the twist. Microsoft itself knows Windows is hard to replace, which is exactly why the company slowly changed its strategy. Years ago, Microsoft acted like Windows was the center of everything. Today, not anymore. Microsoft wants its apps and services everywhere. iPhones, Android devices, Macs, cloud servers, web browsers. Even Microsoft Office works great on Apple products. Now, why? Because Microsoft realized something important. The future may not belong to one operating system. It may belong to ecosystems and cloud services instead. And honestly, that's a little scary for Windows itself. You can already see the shift happening. More software runs inside browsers now. Google Docs runs in a browser. Figma runs in a browser. Many coding tools run in browsers. Cloud gaming exists. AI tools run online. The operating system matters slightly less every year, but only slightly. Because deep underneath the modern internet, Windows still holds enormous power. And then there's one final reason Windows is so hard to replace. Time. Windows survived because it grew alongside the modern computer age itself. Schools taught it, offices standardized it, governments approved it, companies built around, entire careers formed around knowing it. That kind of momentum is almost impossible to recreate. Facebook replaced MySpace relatively quickly. TikTok exploded fast. Smartphones changed rapidly. But operating systems are different. They become infrastructure. And infrastructure moves slowly. Very slowly. Some banks still run software written in COBOL, a programming language from 1959. Some airports still depend on systems older than many employees working there. During the COVID-19 pandemic, several US states struggled because unemployment systems were still tied to ancient software infrastructure. The world runs on more old technology than people realize, and Windows sits right in the middle of that reality. But here's the part most people miss. Being impossible to replace is not always a good thing. Because the larger Windows became, the harder it became to evolve cleanly. Microsoft constantly balances modern features with ancient compatibility. That's one reason Windows updates sometimes feel messy. The company is trying to move forward while dragging decades of history behind it. Imagine renovating a giant skyscraper while millions of people still live inside. That's basically Windows. And every time Microsoft removes something old, somebody somewhere gets angry because a critical system stops working. Sometimes it's a hospital. Sometimes it's a business. Sometimes it's a government office. That pressure never ends. If you've made it this far, subscribe for more stories like this, because the hidden history behind everyday technology is way stranger than most people think.
These nodes represent the
now
critical
let's zoom
factors
out for
beyond
one
its
second.
perfection that
The real
contribute to
reason
Windows'
Windows is hard
continued
to
market
replace
dominance.
is not because it's perfect. It's because the world built itself around it. That's a completely different thing. Railroads are hard to replace. Electrical grids are hard to replace. Roads are hard to replace, not because they're flawless, but because everything connects to them. And once enough people depend on something, replacing it becomes less about technology and more about changing human behavior, business systems, money, education, infrastructure, and trust all at the same time. That's why even today, with powerful Macs, Linux systems, cloud computing, and AI tools growing everywhere, Windows still stands in the center of the computer world like an old giant nobody can easily move. Not because nobody tried, but because replacing Windows means replacing decades of invisible connections buried deep inside modern life. And honestly, most people won't notice any of this tomorrow morning when they open their laptop. They'll click the Start menu, open a browser, check email, maybe play a game, completely unaware that underneath those simple clicks sits one of the largest, oldest, and most deeply connected software systems humans have ever built. And that is why Windows is so hard to replace.